February 8, 1587. The Great Hall of Fotheringhay Castle. A frosty dawn struggled to pierce through the tall, pointed windows, casting a pale light on the faces of hundreds gathered to witness the end of a drama that had lasted nearly half a century. At the center of the hall stood a raised platform, rough and covered with black cloth. It was eerily empty except for a black velvet-covered chair, a kneeling cushion, and the central piece, a chopping block, polished dull by the hands that had performed their grim task before. The silence was almost absolute, broken only by occasional coughs, nervous shuffling, and the heavy pounding of hearts, as if each person felt it within their own chest. No one yet knew that on this very day, in this cold English castle, the fates of 2 queens and 2 nations would intertwine in a bloody knot that would change history forever. Dark shadows gathered over England and Scotland. Ancient prophecies seemed about to come alive, and whispers of the impending climax had long filled the streets of London and Edinburgh. Then the doors opened. The sharp sound of heels echoed in the stillness. She entered, Mary Stuart, Queen of Scots by birth, Queen of France by marriage, claimant to the English throne by blood. A woman whose name was, to some, a symbol of divine right, and to others, a sign of conspiracy, betrayal, and scandal. At 44 years old, 19 years of imprisonment had left their mark. Her once slender and graceful figure had grown fuller. Yet, in every movement, in her proudly held head, and in her calm, almost scornful gaze sweeping over the crowd, shone an unbroken royal dignity. She wore a black velvet dress with a white collar and cuffs, like a widow mourning not a husband, but her own fate. In her hands she held an ivory crucifix, and a rosary hung at her waist. She ascended the scaffold unaided, refusing the offered hand of the Earl of Shrewsbury. Her movements were deliberate, without haste. This was no victim going to sacrifice, but a monarch ascending her final throne. When the sentence was read, she listened with a faint, almost imperceptible smile, as if it were meant for someone else. Then she delivered her last speech, not a plea for mercy, but a declaration of faith and innocence before God, if not before men. Her voice, clear and strong, filled the hall, and even her enemies fell silent, hearing the Queen's final words. Then something unimaginable happened. The executioners approached to help her remove her outer garments, but she stopped them with a gesture. 2 of her ladies-in-waiting stepped forward, weeping. When the black dress fell to the floor, the crowd gasped. Beneath it was a blood-red velvet gown, the color of the liturgical vestments of Catholic martyrs. This was her silent, final, and most powerful statement. She would die not as a criminal, but as a martyr for her faith. She knelt, forgave her executioners, and spoke in Latin, in manus tuas, Domini, commendo spiritum meum. Into your hands, Lord, I commend my spirit. The first blow of the axe fell on the back of her head. A strangled moan escaped her throat. The executioner struck again. Only on the 3rd blow did the head, crowned with chestnut locks streaked with gray, fall from her body. When the assistant raised her by the hair to show the crowd, a final grim transformation occurred. The head slipped from his grasp, revealing a gray, nearly bald skull. The luxurious hair was a wig, hiding the ravages of time and suffering. Thus ended the life of Mary Stuart. But her story, of beauty, power, passion, betrayal, and blood, was only beginning. To understand how this crowned girl in a cradle came to stand on an English scaffold, We must return to the very beginning, cold, war-torn Scotland, December 1542, where the first cry of a newborn queen echoed through Linlithgow Palace. Before she became a legend and a queen, she was a fragile child, born in a desperate hour for her kingdom. 15th-century Scotland was a harsh, untamed land, squeezed between the hammer of English expansion and the anvil of French ambitions. Its kings rarely died in their beds, and the throne was less a symbol of power than a target. Into this world of intrigue came a dynasty said to come with a girl and leave with a girl. A baby girl was born. No one could foresee that her life would become the most tragic and gripping chapter in the history of the Stuarts, and that her fate would mirror the religious and political storms of the era. December 1542 was especially bleak and cold in Scotland. The chill from the northern sea pierced to the bone, and the mist seemed to shroud hills and valleys forever. The country was in mourning and turmoil. Just weeks before, on November 24th, the Scottish army suffered a crushing and humiliating defeat by the English at the Battle of Solway Moss. It was not so much a battle as a shameful retreat. The Scottish nobility, torn by internal strife and sympathies for opposing factions, failed to organize proper resistance. King James V, nephew of the powerful English monarch Henry VII, was broken. A passionate but melancholic man, the defeat was the last straw. He withdrew to his hunting lodge at Falkland, refusing food and company, sinking into despair. He was tormented by fever, but his main illness was deadly sorrow. Both his sons from his marriage to the French noblewoman Mary of Guise, James and Arthur, had died in infancy the year before. Now, the dynasty's only hope was the pregnant queen at Linlithgow Palace. And on December 8, 1542, Mary of Guise gave birth. But this news could not heal the dying king. A healthy, strong baby girl was born. When the messenger brought the news to Falkland, James V is said to have uttered his prophetic last words. With a girl, the dynasty came, with a girl, it shall pass. He meant Marjorie Bruce, daughter of King Robert Bruce, through whom the crown passed by marriage to Walter Stuart in the 14th century. 6 days after the birth, on December 14th, the 30-year-old King James V died. At just 6 days old, Mary Stuart became Queen of Scotland. From the start, her cradle was surrounded not by gentle nurses, but by hungry political wolves. Scotland immediately split into two camps. The pro-English faction was led by James Hamilton, Earl of Arran, closest relative and heir to the infant queen. Arran was weak, indecisive, easily influenced, and secretly sympathetic to the growing Protestant movement. He was supported by nobles captured at Solway Moss and released by Henry VII on condition they aid his plans. Henry's plan was simple and brilliant: to marry his son, Prince Edward, to young Mary Stuart, thus peacefully uniting the two kingdoms under the English crown by dynastic marriage. This policy became known as the Rough Wooing. The pro-French faction, or the Old Alliance, relied on the Catholic Church and nobility long tied to France through trade, culture, and politics. Its leader was the powerful and cunning Cardinal David Beaton, Archbishop of St. Andrews, a fierce defender of Catholicism and implacable enemy of English influence. Beside him stood the widowed Queen Mary of Guise, intelligent, educated, strong-willed, devoted utterly to her daughter's interests and the French alliance. At first, the Anglophiles prevailed. Arran was proclaimed regent. In July 1543, the Treaty of Greenwich was signed, arranging that Mary would be sent to England at age 10 to marry Edward. Scotland's fate seemed sealed, but Mary of Guise and Cardinal Beaton refused to surrender. They hid the young queen and her mother in Stirling Castle, an impregnable fortress, and the royal eagle's nest. On September 9, 1543, the 9-month-old Mary was crowned in the castle chapel. The ceremony was as grand as circumstances allowed. The tiny girl was held by Lord Livingston. A coronation ring was attempted on her finger, a mantle draped over her shoulders, and before her were held a scepter and sword. This ritual was not mere formality, but a powerful political statement. Scotland had its own God-given queen and would not give her up without a fight. Henry VII was furious. Realizing the Scots had deceived him and would not honor the treaty, he shifted from wooing to violence. In 1544, English forces led by the Earl of Hertford invaded Scotland, burning Edinburgh, plundering Melrose and Kelso abbeys, and devastating the fertile lands of Lothian. This scorched-earth tactic aimed to force Scotland into submission but backfired. English cruelty only strengthened resistance and alienated former sympathizers. The internal political struggle also peaked. In May 1546, a group of Protestant nobles, incited by England, stormed St. Andrew's Castle and brutally murdered Cardinal Beaton. His mutilated body was hung on the walls. His death deprived the pro-French party of its strongest leader but made him a martyr and ruled out compromise. The heavy burden of the struggle now fell on Mary of Guise. She proved a remarkable politician. Knowing Scotland could not withstand without outside help, she turned to France. King Henry II Valois, England's eternal rival, could not miss the chance to strengthen his influence in the British Isles. He offered an even more enticing marriage alliance, the hand of the young Scottish queen to his son, the Dauphin Francis, heir to the French throne. For Scotland, it was a saving choice. In exchange for the future French crown, the country would receive immediate military aid. In 1548, a 6,000-strong French expeditionary force arrived in Scotland. The French helped retake key fortresses from the English and besieged St. Andrew's Castle, capturing the killers of Cardinal Beaton. Among the prisoners sent to French galleys was John Knox, a fiery preacher whose name would echo repeatedly in our story. The price of peace was high, but the Scottish Parliament, gathered in the monastery of Haddington, agreed. On July 7, 1548, a marriage contract was signed. 5-year-old Mary Stuart was officially betrothed to Francis, the Dauphin of France. Her fate was sealed. It was time to leave her harsh, troubled homeland behind. On August 7, 1548, hiding from English ships patrolling the eastern coast, the little queen stepped aboard a French ship at the port of Dumbarton on Scotland's west side. Alongside her sailed 4 loyal companions, girls from noble Scottish families, forever remembered as the 4 Marys: Mary Beaton, Mary Fleming, Mary Livingston, and Mary Seton. Instead of sailing east, they journeyed around Scotland and Ireland to avoid enemy ships. The voyage was long and perilous, but after a week, the royal galley anchored off the shores of Britain. The young Scottish queen had arrived in France, the land that would become her second home, the place of her triumphs, and her first great sorrows. From the stormy seas and misty Scottish shores, she stepped into the dazzling but dangerous light of the French court. The Valois court in the mid-1500s was the heart of European culture, fashion's cradle, the center of arts and sciences. But beneath the Renaissance splendor lay a maze of intrigue, where smiles could be deadlier than daggers, and love and power were tightly entwined. Here, in this so-called lace-covered serpent's nest, came the wild little princess from the north. She had to become one of the court's most refined and cunning figures, or be devoured alive. France was another world. If Scotland was a stern warrior in worn armor, France was a graceful lady draped in silk and velvet, scented and adorned with jewels. King Henry II's court and his wife Catherine de' Medicis were the most brilliant, cultured, and scandalous in Europe. Here, not only valor and noble birth were prized, but wit, knowledge of Latin and Greek, the art of poetry, dancing, and refined conversation. Little Mary was welcomed with royal honors. To Henry II, she was more than a bride for his son, she was a key player in his grand political game. He called her the perfect child and treated her with more tenderness than his own daughters. He saw in her the future Queen of France, and even more, the future Queen of England. For the Catholic world, Protestant Elizabeth, daughter of Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn, was illegitimate, while Mary Stuart, granddaughter of King Henry VI Tudor, had flawless claims to the English throne. From the start, Mary's and the Dauphin's coats of arms were shown united with England's, a clear hint of future ambitions. Mary was settled in the children's chambers alongside Henry and Catherine's children. Her education was intense and thorough. She was a gifted student, by adolescence, fluent in French, Latin, Italian, Spanish, and Greek, alongside her native Scots. She sang beautifully, played the lute and harpsichord, danced gracefully, and loved falconry and horseback riding. Her poetry teacher, the great Pierre Dorian, praised her in verse, calling her fairer than the morning dawn. Mary blossomed, transformed from a somewhat wild Scottish girl into a dazzling beauty. Contemporaries described her as remarkably tall for a woman of her time, around 6 feet, slim, with delicate features, pale skin, golden chestnut hair, and hazel eyes that shifted from brown to green in different light. Her greatest weapon was irresistible charm. She listened well, enchanted easily, and men quickly lost their heads. Her fiancé, Dauphin Francis, was the opposite, short, frail, shy, plagued by chronic illness. But Mary, raised with a sense of dynastic duty, treated him with genuine tenderness and care. They developed a warm friendship. Life at court was not just celebration, it was survival school. Mary was at the heart of the powerful Guise family. Her maternal uncles François, Duke of Guise, a brilliant general and war hero, and Charles, Cardinal of Lorraine, a cunning politician and head of the Catholic party. They adored their niece and saw her as a tool to strengthen their power. Their main rival was Queen Catherine de' Medici, an intelligent, secretive, and ambitious Italian woman from a famous Florentine banking family. Once scorned as barren, Catherine had learned to wait and weave intrigues with Florentine skill. She watched with barely hidden hostility the young Scottish girl who was more beautiful, charming, and loved by the king more than her own children. The Guises were pushing Catherine away from power, turning the court into their own domain. This was a quiet but relentless war, fought with hints, intrigues, and whispers in shadowy corners. Catherine surrounded herself with astrologers like Nostradamus and a flying squadron of lovely ladies-in-waiting who, with their charms, extracted secrets from foreign diplomats and careless courtiers, reporting everything to their mistress. Mary, unaware, was under constant invisible watch. Every breath and word was analyzed and weighed. Another important figure at court was Diane de Poitiers, the king's powerful favorite. She was 20 years older than Henry II but had bound him to her for life. Fortunately for Mary, Diane favored her, seeing her more as an ally against Catherine than a rival. In this atmosphere, Mary learned to hide her true feelings behind polite smiles, to anticipate moves, and trust no one completely. It was a brilliant but harsh school, preparing her for the throne, but perhaps blinding her to the true motives of those outside her refined circle. Time passed. In 1558, a turning point came. The Duke of Guise's troops recaptured Calais from the English, the last English foothold on the continent after 200 years. It was a triumph for the Guises and France. Riding this wave, the wedding of Mary and Francis was set. On April 24, 1558, the grandest wedding of the century took place at Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris. 15-year-old Mary shone in a white dress embroidered with pearls and diamonds, a daring choice, since white was the mourning color for French queens, traditionally worn with a long train carried by pages. On her head glittered the crown adorned with the famous, Great Harry, diamond. 16-year-old Dauphin Francis looked pale and fragile beside her. Paris rejoiced. But behind the splendor lay a secret deal. Before the wedding, the Guises had convinced their young, inexperienced niece to sign a secret document. If she died childless, the crown of Scotland, and potentially England, would pass to the French king. This was, in essence, a betrayal of her own country. Mary, raised in France and seeing it as her true home, signed without fully grasping the consequences. Months later, in November 1558, Mary Tudor, Bloody Mary, of England, died. Her half-sister Elizabeth I took the throne. To Catholic Europe, Elizabeth was a heretic and usurper. Henry II declared his bride Mary Stuart the rightful Queen of England. From that moment, a deadly rivalry began between two women who had never met, a rivalry that would last their lifetimes. In the summer of 1559, during a tournament celebrating his daughter's wedding, King Henry II was fatally wounded, an accident of a broken lance striking his eye. After 10 days of agony, he died. His son, Francis II, ascended the French throne, and 16-year-old Mary Stuart became Queen of France. This was the height of her power and glory, Queen of two kingdoms. Her uncles, the Guises, ruled France in the name of the weak, sickly king. Catherine de' Medici was sidelined. It seemed Mary's bright future was assured. But fate's wheel had already begun to turn. Francis's short reign was troubled by religious unrest. The Protestant Huguenots were rising, unhappy with Catholic Guy's dominance. In 1560, the Amboise conspiracy sought to kidnap the king and remove the Guises. It was crushed brutally. Dozens were hanged from the castle walls, and the young royal couple had to witness the executions. Then, in December 1560, after an ear infection turned to brain abscess, 17-year-old Francis died in the arms of his grieving wife. He had ruled just 17 months. With her husband gone, Mary's world shattered. From all-powerful queen, she became a foreign widow. Power passed to Catherine de' Medici, now regent for her young son Charles IX. The Guises lost influence. Mary had no place left at the French court. Catherine, openly triumphant, urged her to leave. Mary spent 40 days in mourning, dressed in white as French queens customarily did. This image, the White Queen, added to her legend, but beneath the sorrow was confusion. What next? Stay in France in a secondary role, marry a European prince, or return home? Meanwhile, troubling news came from Scotland. During her absence, the country had changed beyond recognition. Protestantism, fueled by fiery sermons from the exiled John Knox, had won. The Catholic Church was crushed, monasteries dissolved, Mass banned. In 1560, her mother Mary of Guise died, struggling to hold back the Reformation tide. Now Protestant lords, led by her half-brother Lord James Stuart, ruled Scotland and called her back. But they wanted not the Catholic, absolutist queen raised at the Valois court. They wanted a symbol of national sovereignty they could control. Mary made her choice. After 13 years away, she would return to her wild, harsh, yet beloved land. In August 1561, casting a last longing glance at the fading shores of France, she set sail for Scotland. Her youth, full of brilliance and hope, was behind her. Ahead lay fog, intrigue, and blood. The ship, shrouded in thick milky mist, carried her not just across the sea but through time and culture. She left a world of refined poetry and courtly balls for a land where the sword was the final argument and harsh psalms replaced the lute's song. The 18-year-old widow, raised to rule two great kingdoms, returned to one nearly foreign to her. She brought French dresses, court musicians, and the Catholic faith. But Scotland demanded something different. It was not a question of whether the Queen could change her country, but whether the country would break its Queen. On August 19, 1561, Mary Stuart's galley entered the port of Leith, Edinburgh's harbour. Her arrival was unexpected. Thick fog, later called an omen by the Scots, made her fleet come days early. There was no grand welcome or cheering crowds. Instead, grey skies, piercing wind, and suspicious eyes of a few dock workers greeted her. The contrast to France was striking. Edinburgh was no dazzling capital but a cramped, smelly medieval town with narrow, dirty streets where waste was thrown from windows onto the cobblestones. Holyrood Palace, though the royal residence, appeared a grim fortress compared to the splendid palaces of the Louvre and Fontainebleau. The Scottish nobles gathered to welcome their queen looked upon her with barely concealed suspicion. To them, she was a foreigner, a Frenchwoman and a Catholic, a girl spoiled by luxury, unaware of the harsh realities of their land where the power of lords often outweighed the crown. In practice, Mary had to navigate a web of ancient clan feuds and shifting alliances among powerful families like the Hamiltons, Douglases, Gordons, and Stuarts. In this world, a lord's loyalty first belonged to his clan chief and only then to the distant crown in Edinburgh. Mary, accustomed to courtly bows and unquestioning obedience, found herself acting as an arbiter in endless disputes among ravenous wolves. The land was harsh. The Scotland she had left as a child was a Catholic country allied with France. The Scotland she returned to had been transformed by victorious Protestant Reformation. The spiritual leader of this revolution was John Knox, not just a priest, but a prophetic force of Old Testament magnitude, a storm of unyielding will. Having endured 19 grueling months as a galley slave chained to a bench on French ships, and several years in exile studying under John Calvin in Geneva, Knox absorbed the most severe and uncompromising form of Protestantism. To him, Catholicism was not merely error but idolatry, an abomination in the eyes of the Lord. The Pope was the Antichrist. The Catholic Mass was a blasphemous ritual of Satan, to be rooted out by fire and sword. Knox was a man of unbending will, a fiery orator who could ignite crowds with fanatic passion, and a staunch misogynist. In 1558, he published the pamphlet The First Blast of the Trumpet against the monstrous regiment of women, a fierce attack on the monstrous rule of women, targeting Catholic queens Mary Tudor and Mary of Guise. Now he faced a third Mary, the young, beautiful, and twice dangerous queen in his eyes. Their first meeting took place at Holyrood just days after her arrival. It was inevitable. On a Sunday, Mary ordered Mass to be held in her private chapel. This caused an uproar among the Protestants. A mob stormed the palace, threatening violence against the priest. Only the intervention of Mary's half-brother, Lord James, who stood guard at the chapel door, prevented bloodshed. Afterwards, Mary summoned Knox to her. She hoped to charm him, as she had charmed men at the French court. She met him not as a monarch, but as a reasonable woman willing to dialogue. She spoke of religious tolerance, of her subjects being free to follow their own faith, as long as she could follow hers. But she met a granite wall. Knox refused all compromise. He told her plainly that subjects had the right to overthrow a ruler who imposed idolatry. He unleashed the full force of his rhetoric, condemning her faith, her upbringing, and her very self. The young queen, unused to such treatment, was shaken. She tried to reason with him using all her logic and education, but it was in vain. Eventually, she broke down in tears. To Knox, her tears were only feminine cunning and weakness. He left unshaken. This was the first of 5 personal meetings between them, each a painful trial for Mary. She understood that no agreement with this man was possible. Nevertheless, the early years of her reign were surprisingly successful. She proved herself a wise and moderate politician. She did not abolish Protestantism as the state religion, demanding only the right for herself and her close circle to practice their faith privately. Her chief adviser became her half-brother, Lord James Stuart, whom she made Earl of Moray, and the Secretary of State, William Maitland of Lethington. Both were Protestants, but pragmatic politicians interested in stability. Mary traveled extensively throughout the country to meet her subjects. Her beauty, charm, and approachability won the hearts of ordinary people. She presided over meetings of the Privy Council, demonstrating sharp intellect and a keen understanding of state affairs. She tried to establish good relations with her formidable neighbor, Elizabeth I. The queens exchanged courteous letters, gifts, and portraits. Mary desperately sought Elizabeth's recognition of her claim to the English throne should Elizabeth remain childless. She even proposed a personal meeting. Elizabeth, the master of political delay, agreed to meet but always found excuses to postpone the encounter. She clearly understood that Mary's personal charm could shake the loyalty of her own subjects. And so, the meeting never happened. At Holyrood, Mary tried to recreate a French-style court life, balls, masquerades, hunts, and music. She was surrounded by her faithful, 4 Marys, and French courtiers. But for the stern Scottish lords, especially John Knox, this cheerful court was a hotbed of sin and frivolity. From the pulpit of St. Giles Cathedral, just a few hundred meters from the palace, Knox thundered curses against the Queen's prayers and songs, seeing them as a prelude to the moral decay of the entire nation. In 1562, Mary showed her determination by crushing a rebellion of the powerful Catholic Gordon clan in the north. The Earl of Darnley, the most influential Catholic magnate, was unhappy with the rise of the Protestant Moray and hoped to force the Queen to change her policy by force. Mary personally led the campaign against him. She camped in tents, rode horseback alongside men, and, according to witnesses, only regretted not being born a man so she could wear armor. The rebellion was crushed and Darnley killed. By this act, she proved she was no puppet of Catholics or Protestants, but the true Queen of Scotland. Yet the main question troubling Scotland and beyond remained: whom would the Queen marry? Her marriage was not a personal matter but a state affair of utmost importance. The choice of husband would determine Scotland's political future, and the fate of Mary's claims to the English throne. Elizabeth I, seeking to control the situation, offered her own favourite, and rumoured lover, Robert Dudley, Earl of Leicester. This was both a generous and insulting proposal. On one hand, Elizabeth promised to consider Mary's succession rights if she married Dudley. On the other, she was offering the Scottish Queen, former Queen of France, her own stable master, a man whose reputation was tainted by the mysterious death of his first wife, Amy Robsart. Mary took this as an insult and politely declined. There were many suitors. Philip II of Spain's son, the Infante Don Carlos, was among them. Such a marriage would create a powerful Catholic alliance but was a nightmare for Protestant Scotland and England. Princes from Sweden, Austria, and France were also considered. But weary of political games, Mary made a choice of the heart, and it would prove fatal. In 1565, her cousin Mary Stuart, Lord Darnley, arrived from England. He was the son of the Earl of Lennox and Margaret Douglas, granddaughter of James Ivy's widow, Margaret Tudor. This meant Darnley, like Mary, descended from Henry VII and had a claim to the English throne just after Mary. Tall, fair-haired, handsome, and refined, 19-year-old Darnley seemed to Mary like a prince from a fairy tale. She fell madly in love with him, with a passion only she was capable of. She saw in him not only a beloved but the perfect consort. Their marriage would strengthen her own claim to the English throne. But her advisers, Moray and Maitland, were horrified. They knew Darnley's true nature. Behind his handsome facade lurked an empty, arrogant, vain, foolish, and depraved youth prone to drunkenness and debauchery. They begged the Queen to reconsider. Elizabeth, furious that this union of two claimants to her throne was arranged behind her back, forbade it. But Mary was resolute. She sidelined Moray, who refused to sanction the marriage, ignored threats from England, and on July 29, 1565, at age 22, Mary married 19-year-old Lord Darnley, making him king consort. The honeymoon was brief. Soon Mary realized the monstrous mistake she had made. Love is blind, they say. For Mary Stuart, it was not only blind but deaf to reason, leading her to the edge of disaster. She had chosen a husband whose beauty masked a rotten soul. Their passionate union quickly turned into a battlefield of vanity, jealousy, and political ambition. Into this dark drama stepped even darker figures: a cunning Italian secretary, a jealous and often drunken king consort, and a brutal border lord. The web of intrigue tightened until only a sword could cut it. Soon blood would stain Holyrood's walls, a blood that would forever tarnish Mary's reputation and mark the beginning of her downfall. From the very first days, the marriage was a disaster. Once crowned, Darnley demanded the matrimonial crown, equal ruling rights if Mary died. Disappointed, Mary refused, enraging him. He spent his time in Edinburgh's taverns and brothels, causing drunken riots, insulting lords, and flaunting power. He was not only a useless ruler but a terrible husband. Pregnant with their first child, Mary grew distant, seeking solace in work and the company of trusted friends. One was David Rizzio, her private secretary for French affairs. An Italian from Piedmont, once a singer in the royal chapel, he was ugly but intelligent, educated, loyal, and one of the few with whom Mary could speak her native language of European court intrigue. He became her closest adviser, effectively the first minister, sparking fierce hatred among Protestant Scottish lords. Their loathing was layered like aged poison, xenophobia against a foreign upstart, aristocratic pride at a commoner holding their rightful place, and political fear that Rizzio, suspected as a papal agent, might persuade Mary to launch a counter-reformation and seize lands they had taken from the Catholic Church. Rizzio became a scapegoat embodying all their fears. Darnley, jealous and suspicious, rumors said Rizzio was not just adviser but lover of Mary, though likely baseless, fell into their trap. Thus a conspiracy was born. Protestant lords led by Lord Ruthven and Patrick, Lord Lindsay, made a deal with Darnley. They promised him the matrimonial crown he craved if he helped remove Rizzio, and allowed Moray and other exiled lords to return. The climax came on the evening of March 9, 1566. Mary, 6 months pregnant, dined in her small chamber at Holyrood with her half-sister, Countess of Argyll, and David Rizzio. Suddenly, a secret stair from Darnley's room opened, and the king himself entered, embracing Mary, a Judas kiss signaling the conspirators. Armed lords burst in, faces twisted with hatred, led by pale, sickly Ruthven. They accused Rizzio of treason. Mary leapt up, instinctively shielding her terrified secretary and her belly. Her voice rang with fury and fear. She reminded them she was queen and bore the heir to the throne. For a moment, her royal wrath seemed to stop them. But it was too late. Drunk on wine and hate, they shoved her aside. Darnley held her while others dragged struggling Rizzio away to a nearby room and brutally stabbed him 56 times. The dagger left in his body bore Darnley's mark, the grim autograph of a blood-stained betrayal. It was not just murder but ritual humiliation of the monarchy, a public slap to the Queen. Humiliated, terrified, forced to watch her secretary's blood pooling, Mary was effectively under house arrest in her own palace. But they underestimated her. She showed incredible calm and courage. Recovering from shock, she realized her only hope was the weakest and vilest enemy, her husband. She pretended forgiveness, playing on his cowardice and stupidity, convincing him that the lords had deceived them both. She made him see the conspirators not as allies but rivals who would betray him too. Afraid, Darnley switched sides. That night, while the conspirators celebrated, Mary and Darnley fled Holyrood, riding all night despite her pregnancy to Dunbar Castle, where they raised loyal troops. Returning to Edinburgh with an army, Mary restored control. The conspirators fled to England. She pardoned Moray's return but never trusted him again. Her feelings for Darnley, however, had turned to cold contempt and disgust. The brutal murder she witnessed shattered not only her love but faith in Scottish nobility. Moray's convenient absence during the conspiracy, and many lords' involvement bred deep paranoia. She understood she could trust no one. In this void, the figure of Bothwell emerged, a straightforward man of loyalty and action rather than intrigue, seeming Mary's only salvation. On June 19, 1566, at Edinburgh Castle, Mary gave birth to a son, James, future King James VI of Scotland and I of England. The birth strengthened her position but could not save her marriage. Enter the third fatal figure, James Hepburn, 4th Earl of Bothwell. Opposite to Darnley, Bothwell was a rough, ambitious, and reckless border lord. A Protestant, he remained loyal to the crown and Mary's mother. After Rizzio's murder, his influence grew sharply. Surrounded by traitors, Mary saw him as her sole support, the only strong man she could trust. This dependence grew into something more. Whether she loved him or saw only salvation remains debated, but Bothwell captured her will. Darnley had become unbearable, likely suffering from syphilis, threatening Mary, scheming against her. In December 1566, lords including Moray, Maitland, and Bothwell met at Craigmillar Castle, proposing a divorce. Mary, fearing this would jeopardize her son's legitimacy, refused. Some say Maitland assured her, "Madam, do not worry. We will find a way to rid your grace of him without harming your son." Whether Mary silently consented to the so-called Craigmillar plot remains one of history's great debates. In early 1567, Darnley, convalescing in Glasgow, was moved to a secluded house called Kirk O'Field near the city walls. Mary visited him, feigning reconciliation. On the night of February 9 to 10, 1567, Mary spent the evening with her husband before going to a servant's wedding at Holyrood. Around 2 a.m., Edinburgh was awakened by a deafening explosion. Kirk O'Field House blew up. Barrels of gunpowder were found amid the ruins, but Darnley's and his servants' bodies were discovered in the garden under a tree. Neither showed burn marks. Both wore only nightshirts. They had been strangled. Who killed Darnley? Public opinion and Mary's political enemies quickly blamed Bothwell as the executioner and Mary as the mastermind. The truth is murky. Most likely, it was a lordly conspiracy with Bothwell playing a key role. They wanted rid of the troublesome king and to frame the queen, then remove her from power. Did Mary participate? There is no direct proof, but her reckless behavior convinced many she did. She took no serious steps to investigate. The trial of Bothwell, openly called the killer, was a sham. Surrounded by 4,000 armed supporters, witnesses were too afraid to appear, and he was acquitted. Soon after, on April 19th, Bothwell hosted leading lords at Ainsley Tavern. After heavy drinking, he proposed a document, now known as the Ainsley Tavern Bond. In it, lords not only declared Bothwell innocent of murder, but recommended him as the best husband for the Queen. 8 bishops, 9 earls, and 7 lords signed, including many who later rebelled against Mary for this very marriage. This cynical act protected the lords while pushing the Queen toward a fatal choice, giving her false confidence in widespread support. Then on April 24, 1567, an event sealed Mary's ruin. Bothwell allegedly kidnapped the Queen returning from Stirling and took her to his Dunbar castle. Was this kidnapping or a staged act with Mary's consent? Remains a mystery. At Dunbar, Bothwell was said to have raped her to force marriage. 3 months after her husband's murder, on May 15, 1567, Mary Stuart, Queen of Scots, married James Hepburn, Earl of Bothwell, the main suspect in the murder. The ceremony was Protestant, alienating remaining Catholic supporters. This was the last straw for the Scottish lords. United in a confederation, they claimed to save the Queen from her murderer and tyrant husband. Even those who conspired against Darnley and signed the Ainsley Bond now posed as avengers. On June 15, 1567, the Queen's army met the Confederate forces at Carberry Hill. No battle occurred. Mary's troops melted away. They would not fight for Bothwell. After long negotiations, Mary agreed to surrender to the lords in exchange for Bothwell's safe passage. She bade farewell to her third husband. They would never see each other again. Boswell fled to Scandinavia, where he was captured, lost his mind, and died in a Danish prison. Mary, instead of receiving the honors promised to her as a captive, was brought to England. The crowd that had once adored her now greeted her with cries, "Witch and murderer!" She was imprisoned in Lechleven Castle, a fortress on an island surrounded by a lake. Her jailer was Lady Douglas, mother of the Earl of Moray, who claimed to have once been the lover of King James V and insisted that Moray, not Mary, was the rightful heir. Under pressure and threats, Mary was broken and ill in that castle. She suffered a miscarriage, and it was later revealed she had been pregnant with twins fathered by Boswell. On July 24, 1567, Mary signed her abdication in favor of her one-year-old son, James. Her brother, the Earl of Moray, was named regent. Her 6-year reign in Scotland had ended. It seemed like the end of her story. But for Mary, it was just the beginning of the longest and most tragic chapter of her life, that of a prisoner. She fled, seeking refuge with her dear sister, the Queen of England. She hoped for royal solidarity, for a monarch's help. But instead of open arms, she found cold stone walls and cold calculation. England was no sanctuary for Mary, it was a trap. A golden cage that would become her tomb over the next 19 years. Mary arrived in England as a supplicant, but soon became Elizabeth's most dangerous prisoner, a living symbol of Catholic resistance, a magnet for conspiracies, and a headache that only one solution could end. On the night of May 2, 1568, with the help of a few loyal servants, including the young Willie Douglas, Mary made a daring escape from Lechleven Castle. Disguised as a laundress, she crossed the lake by boat. On the shore, faithful supporters waited for her. Within days, she gathered an army of 6,000. Hope flickered once more in her heart. But on May 13th, at the Battle of Langside near Glasgow, her hastily assembled forces were decisively defeated by Moray's professional army. It was over. Fleeing for her life, Mary rode without rest for 3 days and nights until she reached the southern border of Scotland. Before her stood a choice: to flee to France, where she had been queen but where Catherine de' Medici now ruled coldly, or to seek refuge with her cousin Elizabeth in England. She chose the latter. It was her last and most fatal mistake. She wrote Elizabeth a heartfelt letter, believing that as a woman and a queen, Elizabeth would understand and help her reclaim her throne. On May 16, 1568, Mary, without money or retinue, in plain clothes, crossed the Solway Firth by fishing boat and stepped onto English soil. For Elizabeth I, Mary's arrival was a colossal problem. What to do with her? To receive her at court was impossible. It would mean legitimizing a rival claimant to the throne and turning her into a beacon for discontented Catholics. To help her by force to regain the Scottish crown would alienate Protestant Scottish lords, Elizabeth's allies, and affirm a dangerous principle, that subjects cannot depose their monarch. Elizabeth's own reign was contested by many. Sending Mary to France or Spain was worse. It meant handing her over to England's greatest enemies, a powerful weapon against Elizabeth herself. Elizabeth chose a fourth way, to detain Mary in England under the pretext of investigating the suspicious death of her late husband, Lord Darnley. She could not judge the anointed queen but could hold an inquiry to decide whether Mary was guilty and deserving of aid. Mary was placed under honorable house arrest, first in Carlisle Castle, then Bolton Castle. A long investigation began. In York and Westminster, a commission of English lords convened. Representatives of Mary and her Scottish enemies arrived, led by Regent Moray. There, Moray dealt his fatal blow, presenting the commission with the so-called Casket Letters. These 8 letters and several sonnets, allegedly written by Mary to Bothwell before Darnley's murder, if authentic, proved not only her passionate love for Bothwell but also her direct involvement in the conspiracy to kill her husband. Mary fiercely denied their authenticity, calling them crude forgeries. Historians still debate their truth. The originals were lost. Only copies remain. Some letters might be genuine love notes, others fakes, and some skillful compilations of different documents. But for Elizabeth, this didn't matter. She didn't need a verdict, she needed a reason. The investigation ended inconclusively. Elizabeth declared Mary's guilt unproven but also her innocence unclear. Thus, she could neither help nor free her. Mary remained in England as a guest who could not leave. Her prison became more apparent. 19 long years of captivity followed. She was moved from castle to castle, Tatterbury, Wingfield, Chatsworth, Sheffield, a life in a golden cage, where bars, though gilded, remained bars. Her main jailer became George Talbot, Earl of Shrewsbury, one of England's richest men. This duty, imposed by Elizabeth, became a financial and personal disaster for Talbot. Maintaining Mary and her small court of 40 was enormously expensive. The Crown reimbursed him poorly and irregularly, pushing the Earl to the brink of ruin. His formidable wife, the famous Bess of Hardwicke, who once befriended Mary, grew jealous of her husband's charming prisoner and spread rumors of a secret affair. The constant stress destroyed the Talbots' marriage. Mary's life fell into a monotonous routine, a battle against boredom and despair. She read extensively, practiced needlework. Her intricate embroidery, full of secret symbols and Catholic allegories, survives to this day. She played the lute and cared for her small dogs and birds. But her chief activity became secret correspondence. With loyal servants' help and ingenious methods, hiding encrypted notes in unexpected places, she wrote to supporters in France and Scotland, to the Pope, and the King of Spain. She wove a web of conspiracies, desperately trying to break free. Years of captivity and lack of movement ruined her health. She suffered from rheumatism and chronic pain, and her legendary beauty faded under the weight of illness and broken hopes. Her presence in England sparked a series of Catholic plots against Elizabeth. The first was the Ridolfi plot of 1571. Italian banker Roberto Ridolfi planned a Spanish invasion of England to overthrow Elizabeth, free Mary, and place her on the throne as the wife of Thomas Howard, Duke of Norfolk, England's highest noble. The plot was uncovered by Elizabeth's all-seeing spy network, led by Secretary Sir Francis Walsingham. Norfolk was executed. Mary's punishment was a harsher confinement. Next came the Throckmorton plot in 1583, involving a French invasion led by the Duke of Guise, Mary's cousin, and a Catholic uprising in England. Walsingham intercepted the letters again. Throckmorton was tortured and confessed. The final blow came with the Babington plot in 1586. Young Catholic Anthony Babington and his friends planned to kill Elizabeth and free Mary. But all their correspondence with Mary was monitored from the start by Walsingham. He cracked her secret code, even replaced the messenger with a double agent. When Walsingham had undeniable proof, a letter where Mary not only knew about the plot but openly approved the plan to kill Elizabeth, the trap closed. Babington and his conspirators were arrested and brutally executed. In August 1586, English officers raided Mary's chambers in Chartley Castle. Her papers were seized. She was told she would stand trial for treason. The trial took place in October 1586 at Fotheringhay Castle. At first, Mary refused to recognize the English court's jurisdiction, declaring herself a sovereign monarch who answers only to God. "I am queen by birth," she said, "and I will not demean my rank, my family, Scotland, or my son by answering as a criminal before English lords." But she was warned that silence would be seen as guilt. Mary defended herself brilliantly, without a lawyer, facing England's most skilled lawyers. Day after day, she parried their accusations with sharp wit. Her mind, honed by years of court intrigue and long hours of reading, was her only weapon. She pointed out that she had not been given copies of the letters accusing her, and that evidence relied on confessions extracted by torture from Babington's conspirators. She demanded to confront her accusers and their spies face to face, requests that were always denied. She accused Walsingham, sitting among the judges, of forgery. "This was done by you, Sir Francis, to destroy me," she declared. But the verdict was decided. The Commission of English Lords unanimously found her guilty of plotting against Queen Elizabeth's life. The decision was now Elizabeth's. She hesitated. To execute the anointed queen, her own cousin, was unprecedented. It set a dangerous precedent. She feared revenge from Catholic powers, France and Spain, and from Mary's son, King James of Scotland. She sought other ways, hinting to Mary's jailer that he might solve the problem quietly. He refused. Parliament and the Privy Council pressed Elizabeth to sign the death warrant. England lived in fear of another plot. Finally, on February 1, 1587, Elizabeth signed the order. Yet even after, she claimed she did not want the execution and blamed her secretary Davison for sending it without her final consent. The order was sent to Fotheringhay. The circle closed. A story begun in a royal cradle was destined to end at the scaffold. Mary's death was not the end of her tale. Instead, it was her immortal beginning. In Catholic Europe, she instantly became a martyr for the faith. Her tragic image, captured in poems, plays, and paintings, became a symbol of the romantic heroine, a victim of cruel political games and jealous passions. What of her execution's aftermath? Philip II of Spain used it as one pretext to send his invincible armada against England's shores in 1588. The Armada was defeated, strengthening Elizabeth's rule and Protestant England. France, torn by its own religious wars, protested only formally. And her son, James VI of Scotland? He expressed official displeasure but took no real action. A pragmatist, his prize was the English throne. He understood war with Elizabeth would end all chances. He chose inheritance over revenge. Ironically, it was Mary who ultimately won. Elizabeth I, the Virgin Queen, died childless in 1603. James VI of Scotland ascended the English throne as James I. He united two crowns, fulfilling the dreams of many monarchs. The Tudor dynasty faded. The Stuart era began in England. James ordered his mother's remains moved from Peterborough to Westminster Abbey, the resting place of English kings. Her tomb was placed beside Elizabeth's, her lifelong rival. Two queens, bitter enemies in life, now rest side by side in death. So who was Mary Stuart? A saintly martyr, as some believe? A wicked intriguer and murderer, as others claim? The truth, as always, is more complex. She was neither entirely. She was a woman of her time, caught in a whirlpool of events beyond her control. She possessed many qualities a monarch needs: intelligence, courage, charm. But she lacked one thing: political insight and the ability to read people. Raised in the refined but artificial court of France, she was unprepared for the harsh, treacherous reality of Scottish politics. Her tragedy was a tragedy of choices. She chose the wrong husband, the wrong advisers, the wrong country for refuge. Each step, guided by her heart and not her head, led her closer to the scaffold. In a world ruled by men, her femininity, passion, and beauty were both her strength and her weakness. Her story reminds us forever how closely personal and political lives are intertwined, and how a single human fate can reflect and change the history of nations. Mary Stuart lost her life but gained immortality in memory, one of the most mysterious, tragic, and captivating figures in world history. Her spirit still wanders the castles of Scotland and England, her story continuing to inspire, making us wonder again and again. Who were you, Queen of Scots?